So this week, our lesson is on doing a sunset silhouette. It's a pretty basic lesson in that it involves a wet into wet wash and then mixing darks. So I'm going to be looking at this photo reference that I got. It's actually a sunrise, so you can also use that. And you can see there's some distant mountains that are lighter value, and the foreground is a lighter value. So everything in the silhouette doesn't have to be absolutely flat dark. So on the Google Classroom, you should be able to view this a photo of this big chart that gives the instructions step by step. And then there's also this little document here. So take a look at those, and then watch this video before you actually try doing your own sunset. Okay, so this is many of you remember Pat Griffith, one of our classmates who passed away this spring, and I ended up having one of her sunset paintings, so it's a nice memory. But she did this as a class assignment, and lovely palm trees and a great fresh sunset and some ocean waves. So nicely done. I'm glad I have it. So here's some examples of ones that have been done. You can work really small, like this is a 16th sheet. Mostly we'll be working in quarter sheets or eighth sheets, but it's fun to do some little practices with 16th, especially with the mountains. And I'm going to be showing you how to get those mountains with that little mist in between. Then you can always add birds, and I'll show you some quick ways to add that if you want. That gives it a little interest. Okay. This is an example, and in this, all of the foreground is all one dark color. That's a quarter sheet. Some eighth sheets. And for your subject, you can choose anything that you want, but it's nice to have something that rises up into the sky, like a cactus or a tree. So here's some examples. And it's great to have a reference of the actual photo of the sky, but don't try and copy it exactly. It will take way too long, and you'll lose your timing, and it won't look fresh. So just kind of let whatever happens, happens. So they'll all turn out different. And I suggest maybe doing 2 or 3 little sunsets, and then pick your favorite one that you want to do the silhouette on. Here's one with some water reflected. You could have little ducks or things coming out of the water, little weeds or something, and then show their reflection. So here are some photo references. This is just Escondido. These are some. This was when we were in Massachusetts. This is down in San Diego. This is in Hawaii, in Maui. And then you can always go online, or if you have magazines that might have pictures or calendars, go online and download, just Google images, sunset silhouettes. I would say trees are a really good subject to use for your silhouette. They always seem to work pretty well. Pine trees. And what's nice is that your photo reference doesn't have to be a sunset. When you get to the silhouette part, you can just have a regular daylight tree and use that shape for your reference. Here's one at Ramona Grasslands Preserve. We saw a coyote that day, so I got a distant picture of it. And then also, those of you that are more advanced and have more skills in drawing might want to put a figure in. Windmills are good. So also, advanced students, here's another suggestion. Instead of just doing a straight sunset, you could try just doing a background wash of a wet into wet wash, and then doing any painting of any subject on top, leaving some of that color coming through and just doing your dark and light values. So we've done that as an assignment before, but that's kind of a neat approach also. So that's another option. Okay, and then remember, it doesn't have to be horizontal. You can put your paper vertical. You might want to try that on a couple of them. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that in most skies, the cool part of the sky is toward the top. So you can see it in this reference. The blue or blues might be toward the top, and then you work your way down to the warmer colors. And what we want to try and avoid is having blue and then yellow right next to it, so it would turn green. That's something you want to avoid. So it's nice to have a buffer color, like a red in between the blue, so it would sort of turn purple, and then work your way down into the oranges before you get to the yellow. Now here's a little stroke of yellow, but it was in a white area, so you can leave some areas white as you paint. You don't have to fill everything in. Okay, so I've pre-wet my palette with a little spray bottle. Oh, I also wanted to show you, in lots of art books they show this. This is Joe Garcia's Mastering the Watercolor Wash he wrote some years ago, and he has some lovely examples of wet into wet wash, and he talks you through it. And he actually did this part while it was starting to dry a little bit, but it was still shiny, and he emphasizes that you really want to wet your paper very, very have it really wet, not puddle wet, but wet it several times so the water really soaks in and gives you more time, because you don't want the paper to start to lose its sheen and dry out when you're putting strokes of color. You'll get those backgrounds or blossoms. And then finally he added the details when it was completely dry. So I'll be using pretty much this sunset, but not trying to copy it exactly. I have my palette all set up, and I made a little map of my colors. You probably have already viewed the video on doing color mixing and using your different colors. Another way to make sure, especially if you have lots of colors, is to put some masking tape around the edges and write with a Sharpie what the different colors are, so you can kind of remember. The other thing that I'm going to show you is how you can use tracing paper to do something like a bird. So you could trace the little photo and then put your tracing paper right here. I've scribbled some pencil on the back of this, and then you can go over it with a red ballpoint pen, and it will apply the image just like using graphite paper. And I will also be showing you how to use graphite paper if you have a more complicated silhouette to put. So once again, hopefully you've watched this video about the primary colors and mixing the secondary colors. If you haven't, go back and look at that. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is have nice clean water, and I'm going to, this is an 1/8 sheet, and I'm going to use a 1-inch flat brush and really wet down my paper. And I've taped it with masking tape, and that's nice to do. It not only leaves a little edge for you to, if you later want to put a mat or a frame on it, the framer doesn't have to cut into your painting. And then also as you brush, you're not having to hold it down and get your fingerprints on it. So I'm going to really get this nice and wet so it's shiny. And then I have a paper towel, so I want to eliminate extra water on the edge. And then make sure your tape is really down so it doesn't go underneath the tape. And that's a problem because then the paint will start to ooze out as it dries, and it'll create edges that have little backgrounds or blossoms. And all these things I'm mentioning, I have done. You know, any possible mistake I've done, and you've probably, if you've been painting a while, you've done it. So, you know, it's a process. It's all about trying to get the amount of water to pigment. It's all about timing, and learning about what colors will do what. So, you know, it takes a while to get it. I know I have a few new students this quarter, and I would say, you know, by the time you take the end of the quarter, you're just starting to get the idea of it. And usually I tell people it takes like 3 quarters before you really feel comfortable with what's going on. Okay, so I would like to, while that's kind of soaking in, I'm going to use some brushes and use and I have a sponge here too. Oh, I also have a little test strip. And I'm right-handed, so everything is on the right side. My water, my sponge, my palette are all on the right side. So I was painting yesterday, and I want to clean off the yellows a little bit because they have a little green in them. And I don't want that. So, okay, so I'm going to get some yellow. I like to start with yellow if I can remember to do that, because the brush gets the water gets kind of polluted. So I'm going to put both of my yellows out, the lemon yellow and the new gamboge, just so I have those handy. And you can see the lemon yellow does have some green in it, so unfortunately. Try and get that clean. That was when I was mixing my secondary colors. Now I will go in to get Scarlet Lake, which is a nice orangey red. I'll have that ready. And I like to dab, after I swish in the water, I like to dab it on the sponge to kind of get excess water out, but also to really clean it. So now I am using Permanent Rose, which is that wonderful purpley rose. I love this color. And I want to really make sure, if you have old dried paint, then you really have to suds them for a while to get enough pigment. Because remember, the paper's already wet, so it's going to dilute your colors, and you don't want to have it too washed out. So you got to make sure your colors are a little richer, you know, not tacky, but richer than what they would be if you didn't have a wet paper. So then I'll get some blues. And let's use some cobalt blue. Sometimes cobalt blue leaves little globs of pigment in there. I don't know why, so you're going to have to be careful with that. Oh. And maybe some verdure blue. I love that. I love saying the word just as much as using it. It's a nice even thing. So there's not too much difference between the two. And I don't need a lot of blues. Okay, so now I'm going to check and maybe do, with some clean water, maybe do one more swoop of water so it's nice and wet. And I'm using 140 pounds, so it is kind of wobbling a little bit. Oops, brush hair on there. And if you use 300 pound, it wouldn't be wobbling, or if you mounted it, but we're just doing a little practice. We're not gonna put this in a famous art show or in a competition. Just relax and have fun with it. Okay, we'll see what happens with those bumps. I don't know. Okay, so let's start with some blues up at the top. And I will I want to make my strokes be somewhat horizontal, but you don't want it to look like a flag of Yugoslavia or something with completely perfect stripes. You don't want to say, okay, here's the blue department, here's the red department. You want to kind of do it in a free-flowing sort of manner. And you notice you can have a little blue down in here, and a little blue up here, and a little yellow up here, and, you know, sort of mix them around. And you can leave some white too. So I'll start like this. And I'm going to work fairly quickly. I'm not going to play with this too long. Let's make that color a little richer because I can tell it's got a lot of water on there. And I'm going to drag it, the color, all the way down to the bottom, even though I know it's going to be black. So the next color I think should be that permanent rose. If I put orange and orangey red next to the blue, that's okay, but it will turn a little duller, and you can see it is a little bit dull. So I'll put some. Now I'll use some Scarlet Lake. And finally, I'll use my yellows. Now it looks pretty bright, but that's okay because it will dry lighter than what you see. And I still want to keep playing with it, but I noticed I didn't fill it all the way in, so and it's still nice and wet, so I can play a little bit more with this, but not too much, or it'll start to get, you see, now I get some mud there. That's fine, because I'm mixing blue and orange. So now I'm gonna leave that alone. I have a little white, that's fine. And if you want to lift a little bit more white, you can take a clean brush and, like, maybe where the sun might be, or and actually lift it a little bit. So I'm taking my damp brush, I'm getting the paint excess water off it and lifting a little bit. Don't know what that, if you get a hair or a bug or something, it's probably better to wait and don't do what I'm doing and wait till it's dry. You don't want to get in there with your fingers and try and get it off. Okay, I better leave that alone now. So that at this point, you would want to walk away from it and just let it kind of keep painting itself, or have another piece of paper. If you have these little white boards, they're great. I went to Home Depot and bought a big shower board and had them cut it up. You can bat your eyelashes and they'll cut it up for you. And then, you know, maybe have a couple of them already set up so that you can work on another one while this is drying. And you can also let gravity work like this. I just wouldn't go in and mess with it now at this point. So we're getting a little bit of water, or a little bit of paint that is accumulating down here. So I'm going to take a clean and thirsty brush and just kind of slurp that up, so we don't have that run back in and create a back run later on. So that's looking nice. I like that. So I'm going to put that aside to dry. And what I've done is I already have another dry sunset that I have ready. And like I said, you could have a couple of little maybe 16th sheets taped on there and do a few more. And then you can pick your favorite one to work on, or do some silhouettes on each of them. And they turn out pretty good. You could give them away as little gifts or cards to her people. Okay, so I looked at this, and it's not very complicated, but I just wanted to show you how you could pre-draw it on like a piece of newsprint, like a flimsy paper, or in this case I used tracing paper, and I laid it on there, and then I put a piece of graphite transfer paper, Sorel graphite transfer paper, and that is something that you should get. This is, it's Saral, S-A-R-A-L. Just think of Saran wrap with an L. And this is a very big sheets. These are 18 by 24 sheets, and there's 12 of them, I think. And they also come in rolls that are a little smaller. But if we set up a way for me to sell supplies, I have this already cut up, and you guys can buy a little piece of it from me. So with the Sorel, you always put it dark side down and slide it in here, and then I go over it with a red ballpoint pen, and it will transfer the image onto this. Now I noticed because the Sorel was pretty fresh that I'm getting a little bit of a graphite on there, so I'm going to take a kneaded eraser, a squishy eraser, and find a clean spot and just kind of clean that up a little bit. And maybe even lift up some of the lines so they aren't quite as dark. Okay, so now we have to, and you could leave this on here, so if you wanted to add something else later and you weren't sure, it's already in place. But I'm going to just flip it up, and I'm going to mix some darks. So I wanted you to get basically four different dark colors. And so one of them is ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue. And one of them is alizarin crimson. I hope you can see this. One is phthalo green, or it depends on the company. If you get it from Cheap Joe's, they call it Joe's green. If you get it from Winsor Newton, they call it Windsor green, but it's a very garish dark color. And then finally, burnt sienna, which is a nice brown, a reddish brown. So I'm going to put those colors out there. I'm not really going to bother, because we want this to be fairly dark. I'm getting a lot of pigment in there. Okay. I'm not going to bother to get rid of the other paints because they can all mix in. So here's some burnt sienna right here. Every one of my palettes is set up different, so I have to have these little menus that tell me where everything is. So I'll put the burnt sienna right there. You can see it's a nice orangey kind of brown. I'll get rid of this. There we go. I could mix it with the reds too. And now alizarin crimson, I'll have that handy. And that's a nice rich. There's the old alizarin crimson from, 30 years ago or whatever. It was very fugitive. That meant it didn't, the color would fade away. Now they have permanent alizarin crimson, so I would encourage you to get that. And you can go to Daniel Smith online and see their color charts, and they have all these little indicators on the color chart. I'll show you guys a different time, but it lists how light fast it is, how transparent it is, whether it granulates, and it tells all this information about each color. And then finally, phthalo green. So we'll put that up there. So if you remember on the color wheel, green and red are complementary colors, and orange and blue are complementary colors. So if you think of burnt sienna as kind of an orangey brown, and then you mix it with ultramarine blue, they'll sort of neutralize each other and make a nice gray. And alizarin crimson and phthalo green will neutralize each other depending on how much you put of each, and you get another nice dark neutral color. So what I want to do first is show you how to do these distant mountains and the foreground in a lighter value. So I'm going to have my test paper here. I'll use this one here. and I have my 1-inch flat, and I'm going to mix the blue and the brown together, but I had a lot of water on my brush. So you can see I'm getting a fairly light color. And I love how that orange is in there in the reference. So that's reminding me to maybe make it be a little warmer. Add a little bit of water here and go with something like that. Or it can change as I go across. Okay, so I'm going to try and go across in one swoop. So I want my brush, my 1-inch flat brush, loaded with color. And I'll do what's called a graded wash. Let's see if I can pull this off here. So I notice it kind of goes up a little bit, and I don't need to follow it exactly, but it's going to be quite transparent. So now I'm going to dip a little corner of my brush in water and dab it on the sponge, and then overlap. Now this is very dry. And I forgot that it's so dry because it's years old. So I'm going to start to, I can maybe even change the color a little bit. I'm going to start to make it be lighter by dipping it in water. And I think I'm going to go over this one more time. I shouldn't do this, but. Make sure I've filled it all in, so I'm going to go back up again. Okay. Now I'm going to blow dry that. Bear with me, I forgot I didn't have my blow dryer handy here. Got it. And I want to make sure I clean off the edges so it doesn't run back in. So remember, on this first layer of mountains, it has to be dry before you do the second layer. And also, don't try and do any of the silhouette until your sunset is dry. That demo I just did, it's still wet down on the floor down here. Okay. So now I see that fairly flat horizon line. So I'm going to mix up some, let me just show you this red and green here. This is the alizarin crimson and the phthalo green. That makes a great black, doesn't it? And here's the ultramarine blue. Let me sop up some of this water here because now we want to get dark. Ultramarine blue and burnt sienna also makes a wonderful black, if you can see that. Okay. So now I'm going to try and follow my lines from the graphite paper, if I can, or just look at the reference because it's not too complicated. And I will start to go across here. I like to break the border of the first layer of mountains a little bit, like here and there. And I want to make this horizon line, or this ground line where the houses are, a little bit a little bit straight. Now, because I went farther up on the mountain than I really wanted to, you can see that it's below on this. I want to go ahead and overlap the mountain here. And it's kind of nice if the sunset shows through a little bit. In real life, it doesn't show through a building, but in a painting, you can be entertaining and have it do that. I'll do the trees in a moment, but I want to take the large brush and kind of soften this edge a little bit and actually go in with just some water and create some information that says it's a land mass and maybe a field or something. Let me get in with a dark round brush and maybe a smaller brush here for the pine trees. Okay. I was using a number 10 and now this is a number 6. So I'll get in there. So for the pine trees, I'm going to hold it more like a pencil. And just kind of run right into the buildings here. And you could see a little glow in the mountains as it changed value from the graded wash. And there's some lights on. It's early morning, or it could be sunset. I think this one, she said, this was my niece had put this on Facebook, and I asked her if I could download it because it was so pretty, and she said it was the morning sunrise. Okay, so and if you wanted to add, let's say if you wanted to add a bird in the sky, you could take, just for interest, because there's a lot of empty space there, and you could see, okay, where would be a good place for this to be? If this is the focal point right here, maybe it's aiming down near the focal point, and I'll scribble a little pencil on the back to make it be like graphite paper. And then I'll take my red ballpoint pen again, or any ballpoint pen, and I will place it where I think it would look good, and I'll go over it. And so I can have a little indication of that, and I'll take a small brush, even smaller than the number So smaller than number 6. This is a number 2. And again, I want it to be fairly dark. And I should probably dry this so I don't put my arm in it. If I had the actual reference, I'd have to dig it up right now, but then I could see a little more detail about what's going on, maybe some darks and lights, and not just flat gray. Generally, the farther away it is, the lighter it'll be, and the closer to you, it'll be blacker. So I think this looks fairly big, so that must mean it's closer to us. So I'm gonna darken it a little bit. So there it is. If you wanted to actually lift out that sunrise there, I'll show you how to do that. And somewhere, I don't know where it is, I have a little cutout of a circle. Give me a moment. I'd forgotten about that. And let's see if I can find it. Ah, I'm amazed that I found that. So what I can do is, and I probably shouldn't put it smack in the middle here. Maybe a little off center. Darn. Well, this could end up being the focal point. Let's put it there. Of course, it is fairly close to the middle here. Let's try it right there. And then I'm going to take a little scrub brush. I think these are on your supply list. And you actually don't need to scrub that much. So this is, you can use an oil paint brush, or these are called Fritz scrubbers. So I need to make sure I have nice clean water and a tissue handy. And I'm going to hold this tight and put it where I want it to be, and just kind of put a little water on it. I don't want it to be sopping wet. Just going to scrub a little bit here. And then dab it with a tissue. And this is just a piece of X-ray film, but you could probably just use an index card and cut this out. Or just draw it and then scrub within the lines. So there's a nice little round circle. If you don't want it to be quite that round, you could kind of and it's picking up some of that yellow that was there, but if we want to make it even more yellow, I could take some nice clean water and a little yellow, and go through the process of yellowification a little bit. That's an art word. Okay, now the other thing, and then we'll quit. There are some little highlights here. So I could go in and use an X-Acto knife. Let me grab one. There's a couple ways to do this. I could use an X-Acto knife, or I could try and lift it. It's a little bit hard when they're that small. Or these are these lovely Uniball Signo pens. I think I have some to sell. or you can order them, but I think I have a box of them. So you could just take the exact, and they have to be bone dry to do this, and just kind of scratch off a little bit here. And these are the lights that are on in the houses when it's dark outside. Or you could use the white pen. It's not waterproof, but if you do it at the end, that's fine. Over here, there's some other things that are going on here, so I'm gonna take a small flat brush. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, this is a fairly small flat brush. And I'm gonna just put a little water on it. To lift out a little bit of information about the buildings or the houses there. There's a side of this house that was visible there. I don't know if I can get that, but I could try and lift that out too. It's the roof, which was lighter than the front. So you could delineate some things, some information. Okay, I think we'll call that quits here. You could add more things, but there's just a little sample of one way to do it. These would be really fun too, these palm trees. And then you could lift out some information in the water and add the horizon line later on. But you start with the whole page being paint. There's a nice little island back there, so you could add that at some point. And there's our lifted sun right there. Okay, give it a try. Try a few little ones and then pick your favorite one to put the silhouette on. And then it's always fun when you take off the tape and see the finished product. I would probably not do, if you're just a beginner, I would probably not do a quarter sheet. I would do more of an 8 sheet, like what I did before. And it's still drying. I mean, I'd have to blow dry it to get it ready to paint on, but you can see it's still kind of wobbly, but it's not shiny anymore. So once you dry it, that wobbliness will diffuse. Okay, enjoy.